All right, let's dive into qualitative research today.
Okay, sounds good.
We're going beyond the numbers this time.
Right, getting into the nitty-gritty.
We're looking at how researchers gather in-depth information about human experiences and behaviors.
Exactly, getting to that rich, nuanced stuff.
I've got a stack of sources here, textbook excerpts, academic papers, even a peek into a YouTube video.
Cool.
From a psychology education channel.
Oh, wow.
Ever wondered what it's really like to be a part of a street gang or a cult?
Oh, gosh.
Qualitative research can give us a glimpse into those kinds of things.
It's wild.
Like a fly on the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
I read about that sociologist Suterventu Techesh and his research on Chicago street gangs.
Uh-huh.
That's fascinating.
It really is. He's a great example of what we can learn from naturalistic observation.
Naturalistic observation.
Yes.
Tell me more.
Well, it's all about being in the setting, the natural setting, observing people, describing what you see,
Okay.
and remaining unobtrusive.
Sounds like a challenge.
It can be. But Venkatesh, he was able to gain incredible access to the gang.
What did he find out?
Well, so much. He started as a researcher's assistant, just, administering surveys.
Right.
But he ended up really becoming a part of the community.
Wow.
And he got to see things that an outsider never would.
So he went from overt to covert observation.
Exactly. At first, he was open about being a researcher, but as he built trust with the gang members, his role became more covert, more like a participant.
How do you stay objective when you're that immersed?
Well, it is a challenge, but that's one of the strengths of naturalistic observation.
Okay.
You get this really rich contextualized data.
That's amazing.
But you have to be so aware of your own biases.
Right, how your presence might be influencing the situation.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about interviews,
Okay.
where researchers can really hear those personal stories.
Yes, getting those perspectives that you often don't get from surveys.
So tell me about unstructured interviews.
Unstructured interviews, they're like open-ended conversations.
So the researcher has a topic, but it's more free-flowing.
Exactly. It's about letting the interviewee lead.
That sounds perfect for gathering in-depth information.
It is especially on sensitive or complex topics.
I was reading about Scott Prowse's research on street gangs.
Yes.
He used unstructured interviews.
Right. He interviewed all sorts of people, gang members, victims, law enforcement officers.
To get a full picture.
Exactly. A holistic understanding of gang life.
I can imagine that analyzing data from those kinds of interviews would be tricky.
It is. It takes a lot of skill and experience to analyze qualitative data.
To find those patterns and themes.
Exactly.
What about semi-structured interviews?
Semi-structured interviews, they provide a bit more framework.
So you have some predetermined questions.
Yes, but there's still flexibility to explore.
Kind of a roadmap, but with detours.
That's a great way to put it.
I remember reading about Kiston and colleagues' research on parenting stress in mothers who'd experienced trauma.
Right. They use semi-structured interviews.
So they had questions, but they also let the mothers just share their experiences.
Yes. They were able to gather rich data while still having some consistency across interviews.
That balance is so important.
It is. And then there are focus groups.
Focus groups.
Yes, where you can explore group dynamics.
Like a group discussion.
Exactly. And you can see how people's opinions are shaped by social interactions.
That's fascinating.
It is Kim and colleagues. They used focus groups to study social gambling apps.
What did they learn?
Well, they found that there are these subtle psychological pressures to spend money.
Just from observing the conversations.
Yes, and the interactions within the groups.
So focus groups are great for understanding group norms and shared experiences.
Absolutely. But you need a skilled moderator.
Right, to keep the conversation on track.
Exactly. It's all about choosing the right qualitative method.
Based on your research question?
Exactly.
And the type of data you're looking for.
Yes. Each method has its strengths and limitations.
That makes sense.
The researcher has to carefully consider which approach will be most effective.
And that's what's so interesting about qualitative research.
It really is. Now, how do researchers choose the right people for these studies?
Yeah, finding the right voices is key.
It is, and it's not always about random sampling, like in quantitative research.
Right. I remember that from our deep dive on quantitative methods.
Yeah, so in qualitative research, you're often looking for specific individuals.
People who can provide those deep insights.
Exactly.
Not just a random sample.
Right, think about it. If you're studying refugees, you wouldn't just pick random people from a phone book.
That wouldn't give you the right information.
Exactly. You need people with specific experiences.
So how do you find them?
One way is purposive sampling.
Purposive sampling.
Yes, you choose people based on specific characteristics.
So you're handpicking experts based on lived experiences.
In a way, yes.
That makes sense.
Like Sutton and Miskim's study on perinatal loss.
Right.
They specifically recruited Muslim mothers who had experienced that loss.
To understand their unique perspective.
Exactly, the cultural and religious nuances of grieving.
That's so important.
It is, and another example is in disaster research.
Oh, right.
Researchers might work with school counselors to find children who've been through a traumatic event.
So the counselors can help connect researchers with the right kids.
Yes, and ensure their safety and well-being.
It seems like purposive sampling is all about understanding the community.
It is, and being sensitive to ethical considerations.
Now, what about snowball sampling?
Snowball sampling.
That sounds interesting.
It's like a referral system.
Okay.
You start with a few contacts.
And then they connect you with others.
Exactly. It's helpful for studying hidden populations.
The groups that are hard to reach.
Yes, like Suleiman Hill and Thompson's study.
I read about that.
They looked at Afghan and Kurdish refugees.
Right.
And used snowball sampling to connect with them.
Those individuals were so isolated.
They were socially invisible.
Snowball sampling helped the researchers build trust.
It did, and gain access to a community that was otherwise closed off.
But couldn't that introduce bias?
It could if your initial contacts are all similar.
So you need to diversify your contacts.
As much as possible to get a range of perspectives.
So it's all about being strategic.
It is, and thoughtful about your methods.
Now, how do you know if qualitative research is any good?
That's a great question.
It's not like quantitative research with p-values.
Right, you need different criteria.
So what are we looking for?
Well, things like depth, richness, trustworthiness.
Quality over quantity.
Exactly.
So tell me about those key factors.
Well, there's generalizability.
Generalizability.
But it's not always the primary goal in qualitative research.
So it's not about applying findings to a huge population.
Right. Often it's more about transferability.
Transferability.
Yes, whether the findings resonate with other contexts or groups.
So, for example, could findings from refugee studies in Australia apply to refugees in the U.S.?
That's the question of transferability.
Context matters.
It does. But by looking at similarities and differences, we can gain a deeper understanding across cultures.
Now, what about credibility?
Credibility is about trustworthiness.
So do the findings feel authentic?
That's part of it. But researchers also use strategies to enhance credibility.
Like what?
Well, one is researcher triangulation.
Triangulation.
Yes, you have multiple researchers analyze the data.
So if they come to similar conclusions.
It increases confidence in the findings.
Like a check and balance.
Exactly. And speaking of bias.
Oh, right.
That's crucial in qualitative research.
We all have our biases.
We do, and they can influence how we collect and interpret data.
So how do you minimize bias?
Transparency is key.
Okay.
Researchers need to be upfront about their potential biases.
And document everything.
Exactly, so others can assess the trustworthiness.
It's about being reflexive.
It is reflecting on your own role.
And how your perspective might be shaping the research.
Exactly, and that brings us to data analysis.
Yes.
It's a fascinating process.
Unlike quantitative data analysis.
Yes, in qualitative research, you're working with words, images, sounds.
Looking for patterns and themes.
Exactly, connecting the dots.
Right. And most approaches involve coding.
Yes, assigning labels to segments of data.
So you're sifting through all this rich data.
And trying to find those nuggets of insight.
That tells story.
That's a great way to put it. It's both an art and a science.
You need creativity and rigor.
Absolutely. And a commitment to transparency.
And trustworthiness.
Exactly.
It sounds like you need a unique skill set for qualitative research.
You do a certain mindset.
It's not just about the numbers.
It's not. It's about those stories and experiences.
Trying to make sense of it all.
Exactly. The complexities of human behavior.
Embracing the ambiguity.
Yes, being comfortable with multiple perspectives.
Recognizing that there's not always one right answer.
Right.
It's about the why.
It is the nuances.
Not trying to put everything into boxes. That's what makes qualitative research so valuable.
It really is.
It gives us those insights that we wouldn't get from numbers alone.
Those rich insights.
So as we wrap up, what are some key takeaways?
Well, I think it's about understanding lived experiences.
Seeing the world through different lenses.
Challenging our assumptions.
Remembering that there's more to life than stats.
Yes.
It's about the stories.
The emotions, the complexity.
That make us human.
Exactly.
And in a world that's so data-driven, it's important to value these qualitative insights. It's
Something
about listening
like that.
deeply, asking questions.
Being open to different ways of understanding.
The world is full of stories.
It is stories waiting to be uncovered.
Through qualitative research.
Exactly.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions.
Keep diving deep.
Into the mysteries of human behavior.
That's what it's all about.
And who knows, maybe our next deep dive will uncover even more fascinating insights
I hope so.
into what it means to be human.
That'd be great.
Until then, stay curious.
Absolutely.